I believe that when Mormon was writing the Book of Mormon, he saw the parents in our day. He saw those that are struggling and confused and wanting to understand how to help their youth, and he wanted to help us. He still wants to help us. And so he points out, let's now go back into the Book of Mormon and say, okay, the same ideologies that the Nephites were facing are prevalent among our days, and they're both taking out the youth. What is the solution? Well, Mormon is going to give us the solution. He's trying to help the parents in the latter days. And he points out, okay, so the problem with these children is they couldn't understand rebirth. They couldn't understand redemption. They didn't believe these key doctrines, and they wouldn't follow the traditions of their fathers. There's this growing generation gap. And then they go on to start struggling with moral sin. And that moral sin, of course, eventually leads to them being excommunicated and falling away from the gospel. So Mormon is connecting moral sin with false ideologies, false philosophies. They do make a difference. Ideas have consequences. And one of the children that was struggling, of course, was Alma the younger. Alma's own son was getting taken out. In Mosiah chapter 27, verse 8, it says, now the sons of Mosiah, okay, so the sons of Mosiah too, they were numbered among the unbelievers. And also one of the sons of Alma was numbered among them, he being called Alma after his father. But nevertheless, he became a very wicked and an idolatrous man. He was a man of many words. He did speak much flattery to the people. Therefore, he led many of the people to do after the manner of his iniquities. End quote. Later in Mosiah 27, it talks about how not only was he breaking spiritual moral laws, but he also breaking legal, political laws. And we see also this happening within the church and within American society in general in the early 1900s as these progressive ideologies were taking root in America, as the history was being revised, as we're going through revisionist American history, as we're going through a growth of socialism. You see the Roaring 20s. You see the sexual revolution in the 60s. And you see all of these issues where, again, the children, there's a decline in the morality of the music, in the dating standards, in the dress, this departure from faith, this departure from the belief in the Word of God. You have the flappers, you have false political ideas coming on the scene. You have all of this decline hitting America from these ideologies. I'm going to play a compilation of clips from various documentaries and lectures detailing some of the shifts that took place specifically during the early to mid 1900s, especially with the Roaring 20s. Remember who these children were. Where was the moral foundation they came from in America? And then think of the Book of Mormon and why Mormon is emphasizing this rejection among many of the children and grandchildren of the righteous saints of the early Nephite church. Sometimes we can feel caught off guard and wonder, why are so many youth and so many families falling apart? But this is not an accident. The foundation has been laid from generations and generations of compromise over time.
One of the greatest battles of the 20th century was in this sphere of political science and government and governance. And Christians truly lost this culture battle in America in the 20th century. For 300 years, we'd been working to settle that question. How should a nation be built? And we were trying to write the book on nation building. What are the Christian foundations that have really never been fully and properly and theologically set up in a nation? And our forefathers were trying to do that. But in the 20th century, the 4th century of the history of our country, we lost that battle and we surrendered.
It was the Jazz Age, the Roaring 20s, a decade in which the old belief in hard work, thrift, and personal restraint seemed to be crumbling beneath an onslaught of movie madness, jazz babies, and bootleg gin. Prosperity spawned a new mass consumer culture based around spending, leisure, and fun.
With women now granted the vote, young ladies were inspired to start enjoying aspects of life traditionally associated with men. They kept their hair short, smoked in public, and drank alcohol. They showed off their legs and décolletage, ditching the restrictive corsets for bras and lingerie, and opting for brightly colored makeup. As young urbanites pushed social boundaries, sexual liberation was also occurring. The youth were becoming more permissive, holding petting parties on college campuses.
The shattering ways of 1920s city life were spread by the media to rural America, places where the changes were not always so easy to get used to.
Smoking or drinking, being loose with talk, using profanity, this sifted down from the cities, from New York and Chicago. They were decidedly concerned about what future generation is going to bring.
This country was founded on a respect for God and a sense of righteousness and keeping of the Sabbath day, and people brought their children up under discipline and under the reading of the Scripture. And all of those things were part of the things that bound us together in America.
The people were solid. We had church going and very little crime and so on.
As the cities grew in size and influence, many people in small-town America found them threatening, a breeding ground for new and often alien ideas.
Your children need to understand this logical progression of how our enemies worked. And this is a statement by Wilhelm Reich, who was one of the Frankfurt School faculty members who wrote this strategy. His point was trying to erase all the knowledge of God from culture, to eliminate Christianity from all over the West, not just in the U.S., but all over Europe. His ambition with his revolutionary friends and cohorts was to get rid of Christianity. He said, we've got the formula, this is it. If there's no God, there can be no religion. If there's no religion, there can be no morals. If there are no morals, there can be no self-control. If there's no self-control, there can be no social order. If there's no social order, there can be nothing but the chaos of competing desires. But we can't have chaos in a society, so therefore we must institute behavioral control. What he wanted was mass psychology, in place of all the traditional structures of the past. No family, no church anymore, no free market, no limited local government. Now, you see the progression of that. It's such a simple formula. If you can eliminate the knowledge of God, then you have a perfect opportunity for tyrants, a totally centralized regulatory government to rule. We as communists, said Reich, used to debate people about the existence of God, and after a while I came to a conclusion, and he wrote this in 1933. He said, after a while I came to a conclusion that this was a waste of time. You're not going to debate people away from the existence of God. But what we found was that if you get people involved in deviant sexual behavior, the whole idea of God just disappears automatically. So they worked very hard, these Frankfurt School revolutionaries, masquerading as academics, to insert what they called, just a complete social revolution to overthrow Christianity with decadence and cultural disintegration. Marcuse, the disciple of Wilhelm Reich, said, we would not bring down Western culture with philosophical writings about 12-tone music. You are going to bring it down through sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Despite 1920s America not being a paradise for all, overall, we view the era as a time of optimism, growth, and prosperity. A time when people rejected old moral values and led more carefree, fun-loving lives.
Like the decade itself, jazz was fast, loud, and raucous, uninhibited, joyous, and highly controversial. Young Americans embraced the black-derived music and dance forms as their own. But not everyone was pleased with the new music or movies or any of the other offerings of the new mass consumer culture.
Dancing instructor Fenton T. Bott voiced the concerns of many Americans, both black and white, about the evil influences of jazz. Its primitive rhythms, the savage crash and bang, many people believed was seducing American youths into temptation and sin. The United States, many people feared, was becoming a nation of lawbreakers. And we would hear the same sorts of complaints again with the arrival of rock and roll in the 1950s. and then with the arrival of rap in the 1980s.
Jazz and ragtime developed as a sloppy expression of mockery and criticism and covert protest against the triumphalism of the European traditions. And it wasn't just driven by black musicians, as some historians have suggested. It was rich white kids who were really in defiance of authority by misbehavior, and they were ragging the old days. They were ragging the founding fathers. That means it was they were in defiance of that authority and that triumphalism. The Broadway music publisher Edward Marks, who was publishing in New York, said the best songs come from the gutter. That's what they were looking for, and they were publishing these. People were flocking to it. 1927, Cole Porter, a huge hit of the time. We're all alone, no chaperone can get our number. The world's in slumber. Let's misbehave. And this was a theme of the music in the early 1900s. There's something wild about you, child, that's so contagious. Let's be outrageous. Let's misbehave. They're advocating through the music a kind of moral dissipation that's rationalized misbehavior.
Movies brought fantasies to life. They mocked the old Victorian notions of respectability, class distinctions, and female purity. It's hard now to recognize just how controversial the movies were back in the 1920s. Comic Charlie Chaplin thumbing his nose at authority. Film flappers Clara Bow and Joan Crawford dancing and flirting. Talk about assaults on traditional family values. This was risque stuff.
When we look at all this degeneration of our society, our standards, our music, for many of us, we grew up with this. We're comfortable with it. We're desensitized, really. And yet, if you study history, you realize that what we have become accustomed to was shocking in the past. And the only way we're going to overcome this cesspool around us, the only way we're going to transcend our culture is the message of the Book of Mormon, rebirth. It starts with us, and then we have to take that fresh, new, clean perspective out to our children. That's the entire message of the Book of Mormon. To finish out, as we're talking about these chapters, though, what are the solutions that the Book of Mormon has for us? What are the solutions that Mormon puts in? Well, here are 3 specific things that Mormon gives us. First, he points out that the Lord revealed to Alma the elder strict dealing with sin. Alma is given revelation on how to manage the church. He writes it down, and he judges the people according to the word of the Lord. And if you go through the standards that Alma begins implementing in the church, this is in Mosiah 26, you will recognize many principles and ideas that are heavily criticized today. Compare Mosiah 26 with the strict teachings against sin by prophets in our own day, the guides for excommunication, how it works, how the Lord feels about a sin. If you go to our own day, you have prophets like Spencer W. Kimball, Joseph Fielding Smith, who were very strong and vocal about standards and about sin, what was okay, what was not okay, about morality, about chastity, keeping the Sabbath day holy. As America and as even members of the church were beginning to slouch in those standards and beginning to give into the pressure of the world, these presidents of the church were standing against it, and they are hated today for it. President Joseph Fielding Smith is definitely heavily disparaged. Spencer W. Kimball, even more so in the realm of morality. President Kimball is heavily attacked. He is demeaned. He is belittled. But these men were prophets of God, and they were sent to speak boldly and clearly, because you cannot have the answers if you don't know truth. And sometimes the truth hurts, but it's worth hearing. And so you see that in our day, God sent men, inspired men from on high, to give strict teachings on morality, just as Alma is trying to do this. And you see this later through the Book of Alma. The Book of Mormon is powerful on trying to teach moral standards. But anyway, so the Lord reveals a strict dealing of sin. But then you also see the role of righteous fathers and righteous people with faith praying for those who are struggling. In Mosiah 27, verses 14 through 15, you see that it was the faith and the prayers of righteous fathers, specifically Alma in this case, and the people of the church that ended up allowing the Lord to intervene and produce a miracle, to send an angel to Alma the Younger and to the sons of Mosiah to say, okay, guys, the game is up. This is the truth, and you've got to turn around. Well, that happened because of the faith of these parents. Alma the Elder, very interesting, right before Alma the Younger has this experience where he is called to repentance and he goes through this conversion, Alma the Elder receives his calling and election. This is something that you can study more from the teachings of Joseph Smith, but as a father, he was a father who laid down his life to teach the gospel. He laid down his life in service to his people. He made so many sacrifices. He kept every commandment that God had given him. And because of that, God speaks to Alma and he says, I can see your sacrifices. I can see the efforts that you are making. You will be saved. He receives that calling and election. Mormon puts this specifically in the Book of Mormon. You have Alma the Elder, a righteous covenant father who makes every sacrifice he can for the Lord in the service of his God. And that opens the door, that faith and that obedience opens the door for his son to be able to be saved. It unlocks God's power to step in and protect. And what happens to Alma the Younger is he is born again, which is probably the most important part of Alma the Younger's story and the most important principle that we could talk about today in this podcast. Alma the Younger goes through a grueling, several-day process of pain and sorrow and suffering before he turns to Jesus Christ, and he is saved and he is born again. He stands on his feet, he wakes up, he stands on his feet, and he starts bearing testimony. He says, this is in Mosiah 27, verse 25, he said, the Lord said unto me, marvel not that all mankind, yea, men and women, all nations, kindreds, tongues, and people must be born again, yea, born of God. What does that mean? Changed, he says, changed from their carnal and fallen state to a state of righteousness, being redeemed of God, becoming his sons and daughters. And thus they become new creatures. And unless they do this, they can in no wise inherit the kingdom of God. End quote. This is Mormon's solution to our children struggling. This is the solution. And it's not just for a few children. It's not just for those that go really wild or completely leave the church, right? What is the testimony of Alma the Younger? All mankind, every single one of us, needs to be born again. President Ezra Taft Benson, when he became the president of the church, began hitting this principle over and over and over with great emphasis. He gave a talk called Born of God, wherein he said, quote, President McKay said that Christ called for an entire revolution of Nicodemus's inner man, his manner of thinking, feeling, and acting with reference to spiritual things would have to undergo a fundamental and permanent change. Those who had been born of God after hearing King Benjamin's address had a mighty change in their hearts. They had no more disposition to do evil, but to do good continually, end quote. I just want to add my own testimony to the words of President Benson and the Book of Mormon that I too believe that this doctrine and this principle must be emphasized with greater emphasis in our day. We've got to teach this more to our children, and we are not. This concept of being born again and being born of God is being lost. We talk a lot about turning to Jesus Christ. We talk about, using the atonement, but we're not arming our children with the specifics. What does that mean? And that it is possible, and not only possible, but it is absolutely necessary for them to be changed. Their feelings, their appetites, their preferences, their personality needs to be born again. They need to undergo an entire revolution of their being, a permanent change, so that they don't have any more disposition to do evil. So often we talk to when someone is struggling with pornography, or they're struggling with an addiction, or maybe someone's struggling with something like losing their temper, or not being patient, or just all of these weaknesses that we have, not being clean, not being orderly. There's so many commandments. Maybe we're not keeping the Sabbath day holy. Maybe we're tempted with this temptation or that temptation. And we talk about, okay, well, we just got to overcome that temptation. I'm praying for help to overcome that temptation. I don't often hear us emphasizing to our children and speaking of we need to overcome so we don't even have the temptation. We need to get to the point where we have no more disposition to do evil. And not one day in the next life. No, today, tomorrow, right now. It is absolutely possible. This is the message of the gospel. In a different talk, President Benson said, quote, "To be like the Savior." What a challenge for any person, right? He is a member of the Godhead. He is the Savior and Redeemer. He was perfect in every aspect of his life. There was no flaw nor failing in him. Is it possible for us to be even as he is? The answer is yes. Not only can we, but that is our charge, our responsibility. And he would not give us that commandment if he did not mean for us to do it, end quote. This is the radical teaching of being born again that is in the Book of Mormon and in the words of these Latter-day Prophets. And it is absolutely true. And I can testify of that for myself. I'm definitely not perfect, and there are tons of things I still need to change, but there are parts of my nature that have been fundamentally changed, that I no more have a disposition to do evil with. I no more struggle with the temptation. I no longer struggle with the weakness. I have been changed. And it's just an experience that I wish every person out there realized was not only possible, but easily accessible to them as a free gift from Jesus Christ. All we have to do is turn to him, but the change is real and it is powerful. And this is the only way to overcome. This is the only way. Behaviorism only goes so far. Checking the checkboxes only goes so far. Just praying to just have help. Please help me not to make this mistake today doesn't work in the long run. We have to be fundamentally changed where it is no longer even in our being. Elder Brewster McConkie made a statement where he said, quote, "The spiritual birth comes after the natural birth. And the spiritual birth is to die as to pertaining to worldliness, carnality, to become a new creature by the power of the Spirit. It is to begin a new life, a life in which we bridle our passions and control our appetites, a life of righteousness, a spiritual life. Whereas we were in a deep abyss of darkness, now we are alive in Christ and bask in the shining rays of his everlasting light. Such is the new birth, the second birth, the birth into the household of Christ." End quote. This is the message that saved Alma the Younger. This is the message that saved the sons of Mosiah, and it is the message that will save our youth today. We can talk about apologetics all day long. We can talk about this or that answer to faith crisis. We can share this or that quote, this or that cool archaeological research that supports the Book of Mormon. And while all of that is fine and good, none of it is going to actually save our youth. What is going to save them is the message that is in the Book of Mormon over and over and over again. All mankind, every single one of us, must be redeemed. We must be changed. And if we have been changed, we will bear that testimony and we will take it to the world. We need to teach our children about how the physical birth process, how God set it up in science and biology, actually testifies and teaches us of the spiritual birth. How are you born? In physical birth, with water, with spirit. You go through the birth canal. You have to be conformed to fit through the narrow way. It's a hard process. It is painful, but there is new life and rebirth. Everything in science about the physical birth process was put there by God, was designed to teach us about Jesus Christ, to teach us about our spiritual birth. We need to come to understand it for ourselves, and then we need to teach it to our children. We need to teach them what this looks like through our own experiences, through our own testimony, and also through the scriptures. President Benson, back to his Born of God talk, talked about what it looks like when someone changes. And as you hear this quote, ask yourself, has this happened to me? Has this happened to my children? Have I experienced? Do I know what he's talking about? He says their will, when you're born of God, your will is swallowed up in his will. Those who are born of God do always those things that please the Lord. Not only would they die for the Lord, but more important, they want to live for him. Enter their homes, the pictures on their walls, the books on their shelves, the music in the air, their words and acts reveal them as Christians. They stand as witnesses of God at all times and in all things and in all places. The Lord works from the inside out, but the world works from the outside in. The world would take people out of the slums, right? The world says, okay, let's change your environment. Let's just change your music. Let's just change your food. Let's put you on this program. Let's put you on this check chart, maybe this vision board. That's how the world does it. How Jesus Christ does it is Christ takes the slums out of the people, and then they take themselves out of the slums. The world would mold men by changing their environment, but Christ changes men who then change their environment. The world would shape human behavior, but Christ can change human nature. You do change human nature, your own human nature, if you surrender it to Christ. Human nature has been changed in the past. Human nature must be changed on an enormous scale in the future, unless the world is to be drowned in its own blood, and only Christ can change it." End quote. The gospel of Jesus Christ is simple, and it is this simple: change your nature. Turn to Jesus Christ, and he will change you. And as he changes you, your behavior will change, your nature will change, your personality, your desires, what you like, what you don't like, how you act, how you speak, how you look, how you move, how you walk. All of that will change. Not because you took a class or studied behavior, but because your inner nature is being fundamentally changed. Brigham Young said, "I am satisfied that no man can live faithfully according to the requirements of heaven without having the testimony of the Spirit that they are born of God." You cannot keep the commandments. What are the commandments? The commandments are to honor your parents, keep the Sabbath day holy, do not commit adultery, do not lie, do not steal. Those are far deeper than behavior. How do you honor? How do you keep the Sabbath day holy? How do you express love? How do you be long-suffering and patient? You can memorize every rule in the book. You can try to change your behavior all you want, and you still will not measure up to God's standard of the commandments, because it's about you being changed. And then your behavior changes by default. Alma the Younger goes through this conversion process, and it is what saves him. It was the pleading of his father's heart that he could experience it because his father had experienced it as well. But one of the most beautiful things about Alma the Younger's story is that the journey that he had was not just about him being changed. In Mosiah chapter 27, verse 22, when Alma is struck down, he basically goes unconscious, and he's laying there for several days and nights, and his father causes the priests to assemble themselves together, and they begin fasting and begin praying. And the prayer that they had for this young man who was so wicked and was so rebellious was that he might speak, that he could be born again. And why? So that the eyes of the people might be opened to see and know the goodness and glory of God. He put him in the situation that he was in. He allowed him to struggle, he allowed him to stumble, and then he stepped in to help save him, for more than just saving him, but so that everyone around him could see a testimony and a miracle that God was real, and that God had power, and God had goodness. We need people today with this testimony. We need children. We need parents who can stand up and say, this has happened to me, because the world needs hope. They need to know that this is even possible. They need to know that this is the solution in our day to the anxiety and the depression and the loneliness and the sorrow and the suffering. And we do not hear this enough. We think, oh, you have to be some convert. You have to maybe come from some horrible, horrible background to have some colorful story. Like, no, all of us need to experience and have this testimony and bear our own stories of change, how we have been born and how we have been saved by Jesus Christ. I have my own stories. There's so many times in my life where I had a weakness or something I was struggling with or something where God showed me something in my nature. And I realized, oh my goodness, I do not want this. I do not want this to be part of me. I need this to be changed. And I was changed. It is powerful. It is real. When the angel came to Alma the Younger, he emphasized to Alma the Younger, he said, if you want to know how to be saved and you want to know how to change, you need to remember the captivity and miracles with your fathers. Alma had been taught this. What does this mean? What does this have to do with him being born again? Well, Alma was the son of a father who had been rescued from sin himself. He knew men and he had heard the stories of people in his life who had been born of God, who had been changed. And the angel was telling him, just like it happened to them, it needs to happen to you too. Remember, look at their examples. It is real. Their testimony is real. Our youth today need the same. We need the examples in our lives that we can look to and say, this is real. This person I know was born of God. This is how they were changed. This is how I can change. So our children know. This is why we talk of Christ. We preach of Christ. We prophesy of Christ. Why? What does that mean? To teach and preach and prophesy? It means not to just talk about him as a historical figure. Not to just say, oh, he's just this great being out there that's perfect. It's to say, this is how Jesus Christ changed me. I used to be this person. I used to have this weakness. I used to want and have this craving for some sort of desire in the world, and I don't have it anymore. I overcame it, and I could not overcome it on my own, but I overcame it through Jesus Christ, and this is how it can happen to you. That's why Nephi says, why do we talk and preach of Christ? So that our children can know who to look to for the remission of their sins. Alma the Younger knew, because he had heard those stories, and he knew the stories of the captivity of his father. So when he hit a crisis, he knew who to look for the remission of his sins. This is what our children need in our day. I want you to ask yourself the question, do your children know? Do they know the story of the captivity of their fathers, of their parents, captivity in sin as well as physical captivity? So this also applies to historical examples. Do our children know the stories of the Pilgrims and the Puritans? Do they know the stories of our righteous forefathers being captive in Europe during the Reformation, being entirely enslaved? Do they know how God delivered them? Do we know the miracles from our church history? And if we don't, why not? Our children need to know. And that is why on this podcast, over and over again, I have re-emphasized and emphasized again and again the importance of looking to the fathers, remembering the fathers, looking to Mormon, looking to these men. They knew the way to God, and they have a testimony and experience that is real, but it only matters if it happens to us as well. And our children need to know. They need to know, my dad had this problem, and my dad was lost, and this is how he was found. My mom was struggling, and she had this weakness, and she couldn't change it on her own, and this is how she was changed. She's a different person now. The person I knew a few years ago is different than the person I know today. The change is real, and our children need to know it. They need to see it so that they can experience it for themselves. If any of us are wondering whether we have had this conversion, the fruits are clearly outlined in the Book of Mormon. This is how you know. When the sons of Mosiah and Alma go through their conversion, they immediately go out to repair the damage that they had done through their bad example. They begin explaining and teaching the scriptures and testifying and telling their conversion story. In Mosiah 27, verses 32 through 34, it reads, "It came to pass that Alma began from this time forward to teach the people, and those who were with Alma at the time. The angel appeared unto them, traveling roundabout through all the land, publishing to all the people the things which they had heard and seen, and preaching the word of God in much tribulation, being greatly persecuted by those who were unbelievers, being smitten by many of them. But notwithstanding all this, they did impart much consolation to the church, confirming their faith, right? Telling them, guys, hang in there, keep holding on, this is true, and exhorting them with long suffering and much travail to keep the commandments of God, end quote. How do you know if you've been converted in your life? If you are filled with this passion and desire and zeal and drive to take that message to others, explaining the scriptures, testifying of your conversion. If not, maybe you have not experienced the redeeming love and the joy that comes from redemption. Or maybe you have and you've forgotten, and you need to rediscover that. In Mosiah chapter 28, verse 3, it's speaking of the sons of Mosiah, and it says they were desirous that salvation should be declared to every creature, for they could not bear that any soul should perish. Yea, even the very thoughts that any soul should endure endless torment did cause them to quake and tremble, end quote. This is what repentance looks like for every single one of us, not just the colorful converts or people that were, the really bad sinners. Every single one of us has sinned. Every single one of us has fallen short. Every single one of us needs to be born again. Are we acting like this? Do we feel this desire? Do we get up in the morning with the thought that we cannot bear that any soul out there should perish, and we're willing to lay down our lives to fix it? Are our children acting like this? Because if not, they are not converted and we have work to do. This is why President Harold B. Lee said, quote, "We cannot make a permanent difference in the lives of people unless we involve them in serving others so that they can grow themselves," right? This is almost a first step. Our children need to see us out there engaged and serving and taking that message of redemption, and we need to involve them in it. He says we will never save people by just having them sit idly by being good. We have to get them involved in doing good. Why? Because that is what a truly repentant person does. If you've been born again, you will be involved in doing good. Therein is their safety, he says. If we're looking for a way to help protect our children and help them, he says therein is their safety, to become involved in some phase of activity, all up and down the line, from the youngest child to the oldest person. To the extent that we can involve them and help in their activities, we will build faith within them. Then only can we keep that kind of strength that is necessary to withstand the buffetings that are around them, end quote. This is what we see in the conversion story of Alma the Younger and the sons of Mosiah. And it has a beautiful finish to this, at least part of the story. In Mosiah 28, after traveling all throughout the Nephites, they teach everyone they can, and then they start thinking, who else can we help? And they realize, you know what? No one's gone and helped the Lamanites. Yeah, in fact, we find later in the Book of Mormon, the Nephite people in general said there's no way to reach the Lamanites. They're bloodthirsty. They're killers. There's no hope for them. They're not going to change. They don't want to change. They could care less. They want to kill us. We should be protecting ourselves. In fact, we should go and kill them, was the response. And yet, these men, Ammon, Aaron, Omner, Himni, Alma, they had been changed. They had been rescued, and they realized, no, human nature can change, and anyone can. And I'm willing to lay down my life so that they can be saved and they can experience that joy. And so they go to their father and they say, Dad, we want to go to the Lamanites. And Mosiah's a little bit nervous about this. So he goes to the Lord, and the Lord says, let him go. And not only let them go, but because they were willing to make that sacrifice, they shall have eternal life. Those sacrifices would lead to their exaltation. This is the message we must teach to our children. We teach it through example. We teach it through our lifestyle. We teach it through our words. And we teach it over and over because it is the only solution of hope for this world. At the time that we're recording this is right before Resurrection Sunday. And this story has been on my mind a lot as I have been watching people, family members, extended family, people I know that are struggling and are hurting and are broken. And every single time I think about both this story and this holiday that is coming up for us, celebrating the resurrection of Jesus Christ. This morning, as I was preparing to film for this, the story of Jesus Christ came to my mind, specifically about the resurrection. Remember that the children that were struggling in the Nephites' day didn't believe in the resurrection because they had lost this understanding of death, being raised from death into new life. And I just had this very strong and profound feeling that we need to believe. We need to exert faith. I'm sure there's probably a lot of people listening to this podcast that may have given up hope for someone that they know that's struggling. Maybe they feel like they've tried and they've tried and they've prayed and they've prayed. But like Alma the elder and those other people in the church, we cannot give up. We have to pray and we have to keep preaching this message of redemption. And God will intervene to help change hearts. He can and He will. We just have to have the faith that He will do it. President Ezra Taft Benson said, yes, Christ changes men, and changed men can change the world. Men changed for Christ will be captained by Christ. Like Paul, they will be asking, Lord, what wilt thou have me do? Men captained by Christ will be consumed in Christ. To paraphrase President Harold B. Lee, they set fire in others because they are on fire. End quote. The answer is the same as it's always been for thousands of years. This is the message that saved Alma the Younger and the sons of Mosiah. But not only them. It's the message that saved King Lamoni and his people, the people of King Lamoni's father, all of the anti-Nephi Lehis. It's the message that converted the stripling warriors and led to that entire miracle and so many other miracles in history. It was this message that not only converted the stripling warriors and their families, but in the Book of Mormon, it says that their faith was so strong through this conversion that they never fell away. We as Israel are broken and lost in this culture that we've grown up in. Many of us are doing things every day that are wrong, that are corrupt, that are sinful, but we don't even realize it because it's just the way that we've grown up. It's what we're used to. It's part of us. It's part of our identity. It's part of our nature. It's what we think that we want. But we're definitely experiencing the consequences and the suffering of those choices and that behavior and that lifestyle. And yet the message of the gospel is that Christ can come in and revolutionize us to create in us a completely new creature, and that we must become that new being to experience the happiness and the joy that Jesus Christ has for us. This is the message that is needed to save Israel in the last days and to turn the course of history so that we can build Zion. This is the message that will save you and your children.